Nobody has control over life and death. Unless they are taking lives and causing death. Now, can you promise me that no one else is going to die? Get up!
Welcome back to the 10th annual Halloween special. Tonight we're talking about a film that came out of the year 2000, a franchise starter called Final Destination, directed by James Wong and scripted by him and Glenn Morgan, as well as Jeffrey Riddick. Wong and Morgan were most known for The X-Files at the time. They had been involved in many episodes as producers as well as writers. And if you're a fan of The X-Files, you will see many familiar faces in this movie, including Pusher, a really good episode that was written by Vince Gilligan before his Breaking Bad fame. Alex Browning, played by Devon Sawa, is among a group of high school students readying themselves for a trip to Europe. When he suddenly has a premonition that their airplane will crash, he screams to warn the others, but instead he is thrown off the plane along with all of his friends. But the plane does eventually crash after they get off. When one of the survivors mysteriously dies, Alex begins to believe that death might be catching up to them. People often talk shit about 90s and 2000s horror, and yeah, there's a lot there that doesn't really work. In the 70s and 80s, horror really became something new and original that it had never been before with films like The Exorcist, or Halloween, or Black Christmas, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and tons of other films that have since become classics. But in the 90s, you had Scream, and some other things like Jacob's Ladder, and films that maybe don't get talked about as much. But the 90s and 2000s were sort of a refresher period, and nowadays you have what they unfortunately call elevated horror, which is stupid. There's no such thing in my opinion. That implies that certain horror is better than others, and other horror is more trashy or whatever, when all of it is capable of being very good, irregardless of who made it or what it's about. And in some ways, the 90s and 2000s did have a lot of really bad horror, but I think looking back, there's a lot that I love about that time period, and you can really look at those 2 decades in retrospection and see just what it did for horror with movies like The Blair Witch Project, Paranormal Activity, Saw, Scream, and there's some hidden gems in the 90s too, like A Stir of Echoes. But Final Destination for some reason rarely gets the praise that it deserves. I think this is a really well-made movie, and it's one of the main reasons I've never looked at James Wong for directing Dragon Ball Evolution and blamed him in any way for that movie, because with this film, and the film that I like even more in the franchise, the third one that he also directed, he proves himself a very capable and interesting filmmaker behind the camera. Final Destination builds so much dread during the first 20 to 30 minutes that my friend who saw it for the first time last night related about 30 minutes in that the film was really good at making him feel like something bad was going to happen all the time. The plane crash sequence is really well executed, and even better executed is the eventual reveal that the plane really does explode. I love the fact that you don't hear the explosion initially and the glass shattering comes later, and the fact that they focus on it from a distance like that instead of the really epic sort of Die Hard 2 shot they could have done makes it feel so much more realistic and scarier. Another thing I love about Final Destination is that even though Alex saves these kids' lives, everyone except for Ali Larter's character looks at him like he's some kind of devil. This does a lot for the dynamics of these youths as well as the teacher who survives the plane crash. It pits everyone against each other and there's no easy conversations to be had. Nobody's like, oh, thank you so much, man. I'm so glad I'm alive. They're all like, dude, get the fuck away from me. I don't want to be around you. And there's more smart visual storytelling early on when all of the families come to see their kids after learning that they've survived this horrific event. No one shows up for Ali Larter. She's left alone. Everyone else has parents or somebody there for them except her, and you immediately know she's got a terrible home life. The entire first act of this movie is the type of thing that would make just about any producer or executive who might read your script get really fucking excited. This is an instant sell kind of setup. It is that good. Final Destination does not get the credit it deserves for setting up rules very well, for having an understandable, invisible force that's constantly after you, and for having a very marketable way of presenting it. It's also not as teen angsty as so many movies that came out right in this period. They all had posters with teens wearing dark clothing, staring at you in a very sexy way, and I love all of those movies. I really like this time period in horror because it was so important for me. It was very integral for me to watch horror films at this time, from I Know What You Did Last Summer all the way to the mid-2000s with movies like Red Eye that I got to see in theaters, and I'm so glad I did. This time period in horror was very important for me, and I feel like Final Destination as a franchise doesn't really get the respect it deserves. What's also a lot of fun with this whole franchise, but with this film especially, is that the deaths never really go the way you think they're going to. That's part of the hook. The idea is that the whole time you're with someone alone, you're expecting anything in their house to kill them. And they're setting up a legitimate trap that looks like it will, but it's always something else that jumps out at them or some unexpected development. But there are certainly elements of Final Destination that don't necessarily work for me. I do think that the first act is probably the strongest. The finale is okay, but it does feel a bit rewritten, and I'm not entirely sure, but it does feel like the ending of the movie was potentially a rewrite or a reshoot. Don't know for sure, can't confirm it. But the first half of this movie has so much effective dread and really interesting sequences, and James Wong does his best to make every single item around a person feel like it could kill them. And it kind of makes you look around your house like, fuck, I should probably put some things in plastic and like put things away in the cabinets. That shouldn't be there. There's also a lot of convenient character interactions. People just kind of appear where they need to be. There's one scene where all the characters just show up at like a coffee shop or something, and they're just there all at the same time. And I think the excuse is that death sort of predestined them to be there, but it doesn't 100% work for me. I also really like a lot of the actors in the film. I think Devon Sawa is great. I think Seann William Scott is really funny. I love seeing him in horror. I know he has a big interest in it. He's going to be in that new Becky movie. I'll just put this out there. I really want to work with Seann William Scott one day. My visual effects supervisor on Shelby Oaks said he's one of the nicest fucking people in the world, and I want to make a horror movie with Seann William Scott, and I'm putting that out there into the universe because sometimes when I do that, it actually happens. So, I don't know, stay tuned over the next few years. Maybe I'll get to. Wouldn't that be great? It'd be cool to work with Devon Sawa, too. I think he's awesome in this film, and I think he's done a lot of really cool things lately, like in The Chucky Show, or Hunter x Hunter. He's really good in that film. You can just tell that James Wong and Glenn Morgan and Jeffrey Riddick really cared about horror. Like, they even named half of their characters after famous horror directors and other characters from films. Even though Final Destination came out in the year 2000, to me it feels like one of the last true 90s movies because it had that feel still. After 9/11, movies got sort of strange and dark and a little more serious than they needed to be. And there were a few films that came out in 2000 and 2001, and even 2002, like Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, which was filming before 9/11, that just had this sensibility of enjoyment, just for enjoyment's sake. I really miss that in movies, and I'm glad we're seeing more of that lately in films like Top Gun, Maverick, or A Quiet Place 2, sort of a return to just pure audience entertainment, which is my favorite shit. So if you've never seen Final Destination, it's not like the greatest horror movie ever made, but I do think that it's a lot of fun, and I think it's got a great concept. It's very clear why it was a franchise starter. Guys, thank you so much as always for continuing to watch the 10th annual Halloween special. I got more videos coming your way very soon, and if you like this, you can click right here and get Stuckmanized.